Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Emerging Markets Entrepreneur. It's a new web series where we speak to founders, startups, and young companies about the challenges they face and the opportunities that they see when it comes to running their businesses. I have today with me my co-host, Alexander Neeps. Alex is the co-founder of Printulu, an online branding and printing company. Alex, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Sid, that we can here have a platform for speaking about this pandemic with other entrepreneurs and how we can jointly react to this absolute crisis.
Why don't you take this opportunity to tell us a little bit about what Printulu does?
Printulu is an online printing platform, and basically what we do is we integrate with a lot of small to medium-sized manufacturers for branding products and marketing material products. We scheme or we batch orders together from small to medium-sized businesses, batch them together and give them to the suppliers and to our factories that are working with us. And by that, we can really reduce the cost for SMEs, for their marketing collaterals, for their packaging requirements, for their branding needs. In the last 3.5 years, we've scaled to more than 10,000 clients and we're growing very rapidly. And now, obviously, the pandemic has really hit us hard and brought our business to a standstill.
Why don't you tell us how this COVID-19 situation has impacted you specifically?
To get straight to the point, basically, no one has shown me yet how to run a business on zero revenue, basically. And I mean, that's the situation that most businesses, I guess, are in right now. And right now, it's just about maneuvering through a time and phase in order to have sufficient liquidity to not run dry. I mean, our revenue has basically dropped more than 90%. Right now we are almost in a hibernate mode, or we're trying to go into a hibernate mode that does not damage the company in the future too much. But it has really impacted us.
That's quite unfortunate, and I'm sure you're in the same boat with a lot of entrepreneurs globally, not just in South Africa. So coming back to the context of why we're here, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to unpack various things that one can do in their business to firstly improve liquidity. Today, we're going to speak about fixed costs. Fixed costs are quite difficult to cut in any business. What have you done to manage those expenses?
Yeah, I think generally, I mean, it makes sense to start with fixed cost and discuss fixed cost here for other entrepreneurs initially, because the higher your operating leverage, that means the higher your fixed cost percentage of your total costs, the more difficult it is to maneuver through these times and these times of zero revenue, I call it. So in my opinion, it's very important to firstly identify, what is your percentage of a fixed cost versus variable costs? And then based on that analysis, you focus first on what is the higher percentage. Generally, though, if you have a higher percentage of variable cost, then you should be able to maneuver better through the crisis. But this also depends on your payment terms. So you might have a short-term knock, but long-term you should be better off. Whereas if your fixed cost is high, I mean, look at Lufthansa, they have very high operating expenses. They have, planes that they operate, and every hour they're currently burning 1 million euros in cash. So that's obviously now a lot more difficult, situation for a business to be in. And this is why I wanted to go first through, the things that I would look at as a business owner and show an example of how we looked at the different trade-offs you have to make in these unprecedented times.
So let's unpack that a little bit further. What are some of the fixed costs that you see in your business today?
Rent, it's server costs, it's the IT projects we are funding in order to make our platform better, team costs. And then you have some subscriptions and some other admin costs, basically, in order to run the business. Before we jump into the details of what we did on these different costs, whenever we looked at these fixed costs, we always had a couple of criteria in mind to kind of balance off the impact it has on liquidity versus the long-term the long-term effect it can have on the business. So we're looking at what is the cash impact, what is the time it will take if we now, for example, don't have an office. How will it impact us in the future, for example? How will that impact us to restart again? If we lay off 1, 2, 3 people, how is that going to impact us to bounce back when we get busy again? Then I think we always looked at, okay, what are our projections in terms of lockdown time? Because that will also impact how quick we can bounce back. And then we look at social responsibility. You know, our team has really pushed throughout our growth that we've had in the past 3.5 years. And therefore, we really want to avoid at all costs to, you know, to have an impact on the team.
Sure.
Yeah, but obviously the longer the lockdown is taking, or the impact of the pandemic is taking on the business, the more difficult that is getting.
So thanks for outlining that, but let's go into the detail, because I think a lot of our viewers would be interested in understanding how can they, what are the sort of steps they can take. So let's look at a lease agreement, for example. How does one negotiate getting out of a lease agreement, especially if you sign a long-term lease, particularly if you wanted to benefit from getting a lower rate? So
100%. So I think here it's very, I think there are multiple options that you can do. I think first of all, you can try to cancel a lease. This obviously, as you said, it depends on your lease agreement that you have. You can negotiate a rental holiday, and then you can also declare what we call force majeure. Let's go through the different steps. I personally canceled directly our lease. I was lucky, to be fair, because we've had a month-to-month lease agreement. So this was easy, relatively easy for us. However, not everyone might be in that position. I would recommend everyone who is on a month-to-month lease agreement right now to cancel their lease, because you do not know how long this is going to take. Estimates say it might be impacting the country for the next 18 months. And if that's really the case, you really want to make sure that you keep liquidity you know, in the bank account and not pay your landlords, and you might not even be able or allowed to go to the office, because the pandemic might come back in waves. Rental holidays, that's obviously a discussion you need to have on with your landlord. We've had these discussions as well with our landlord. These are normally very, very lengthy discussions. So then you get from the banks, you have to fill out, and you often have to then kind of disclose all your information of your business, how much money you're making, It's not necessarily the most favorable thing, but if you have a very, very difficult lease agreement, it's better than nothing. Just, you need to remember, he also said, I mean, the rental holiday does, I mean, it's, you have to pay it back then later on. So it's going to hurt you then in the future. So you're just postponing the pain in that sense. So that you just have to keep that in mind. Then you can declare force majeure. That's kind of the clause to say, you know, it's an act of God kind of thing.
Sure.
It's completely out of our control. And this is why we can't pay rent. Some experts say it's quite difficult to enforce, especially if it's not particularly mentioned in the lease agreement.
Sure, absolutely. I was just going to ask you, actually, what happens if you haven't thought that through?
So I think in the current lease agreements, it's not in there. Going forward, a lot of people will have it in their lease agreements. But right now, that will be very difficult for most businesses to actually enforce. And if you're not called, you know, Coca-Cola or one of the big corporates in the world that have a lot of money for lawyers, this might not necessarily be the best way to go. What I would do if I'm not on a month-to-month basis, I would really just go to the landlord, say, listen, I'm running out of cash. What can we do together? And how can we fix this? Can you give me a rental holiday? And can you give me a discount? And it's a discussion like everything in the world. you also have to look at it. What is the incentive from the landlords right now? So do you think they have a lot of options right now? Do you think there are going to be a lot of new tenants going forward?
They don't. So really, you have a little more negotiating power. So it's an opportunity to bring two parties together and work out a solution that works for both of them. I want to actually change gears for a second. Let's talk a little bit about the future. I have this belief that after we get back to some level of normalcy, landlords and sort of office space owners around the world are probably going to be in a bit of trouble because we're all getting so used to working from home. Do you think the future of work is at the office, or is it in a WeWork type structure, or sort of temporary offices or mobile offices, or is it going to be more of a decentralized thing that we're seeing now? And the second part of this question is, what is some of the technology that you've been using to work remotely and keep your team motivated during this time?
Yeah. It's a very interesting question. I've thought about this as well. I mean, if you look at the main technology companies like Google and Facebook, I mean, they have one of the fanciest offices in the world. They don't use necessarily WeWork. They actually use an office space, a come together, a place as a way to build culture. And I think for most businesses, I think this will still, even in the future, be the case. However, I think it's not going to be as big as it used to be because it will be more flexible work arrangements. So my hypothesis is that we will still go to the office because a lot of people are also extremely unhappy just working from home.
Yes.
But I think it's going to be more flexible and kind of a mixture. What type of technology?
Second question about the technology and keeping your team motivated. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So the technology we are using, we are completely on Google. So we use Google Hangouts, Google Docs, Google. So here is my advertisement for Google, I guess.
I was just going to say, we know who to speak to after this for sponsorship discussions.
Yes. So we completely are on Google. I mean, what we make sure is, I think the main things for us that we are trying to do is remote work is not for everyone. And we're realizing that some work better and some work not so good. So what we are trying to do is kind of a hybrid way where we have daily huddles in the morning with the different teams. And we make sure that everyone knows what's kind of the goal for the day. And then everyone kind of updates us during the day of hurdles and sends a short summary at the end of the day of what has been achieved and what were the hurdles. On top of that, we have a couple of what we call Printulus. So we have every day we have a 15 minutes workout session together over Hangouts in order just to make sure that, you know, we do an activity together, because I think otherwise it can also get a little bit of lonely in lockdown South Africa.
Very inspiring. So let's move forward to some of the other fixed costs we spoke about. You mentioned server costs. Now, this is something I happen to know a little bit about, so I might grill you a little bit more than with the other question. Tell me, are you talking about migration to the cloud? Are you talking about scaling back capacity? What are you talking about?
So server costs, I mean, we are spending, I mean, I can tell you, we're spending more than 20,000 Rand a month just on server costs to keep our platform performant. Why is that the case? We have, on the one end, we have the Printulu website that everyone sees, but on the back end, we have a lot of functions to track orders in factories. And this is the reason why our platform is a lot bigger than what actually people see. And because we do weekly updates on the platform, there's also a lot of staging environments and other things. Generally, we don't have servers or anything offline. So I think we've done this thing in the cloud immediately. We are with AWS, and and there are a couple of things that you can do basically on those settings at AWS in order to reduce your cost significantly. So we spend 20,000 Rand, or more than 20,000 Rand, 25, 26. It depends really on the exchange rate, to be fair. But on server costs.
I want to stop you there for a second. AWS has just launched a data center in Cape Town, so surely they should be charging you in Rand.
Yes. We are going to migrate, but we're in Ireland right now, and we first want to see on a test basis now how the performance of that data center is going to be. So we don't want to be with our platform the guinea pig, so to say. So we are testing it now with one instance, but we're not moving everything over as yet. But there are a couple of things that you can do basically to reduce your server costs. And I just want to name a couple so that people know what they can kind of tell their developers to look at. I think one is delete old backups. You know, you keep backups of your system, and at some point it's not really useful. And that's one thing that you can really do. The second thing you can really do is you can remove non-used instances. So for example, if you have a staging environment, but you're actually not using it because you don't have development work right now, then you can temporarily disable that instance. The other third thing is you can storage all storage intensive files, not on HDD, but on HDD instead of SSD. And for us, I mean, we are very artwork heavy. I mean, we have hundreds of artworks that are generally loaded. I mean, that has a huge impact on it, especially if you not directly or often have to get access to the files. Then it makes more sense to go on the more cost-effective HDD. And then basically we have our traffic dropped by more than 80%. So we really reduce also our EC2 and our RDS instances, because we don't need it right now. And that's the advantage of having it in the cloud. You can really reduce the instances on that. And we are estimating that we can save 60 to 70% of the costs associated to what we had before on the server side.
So just to summarize, the first thing one should do is look at redundant storage for your backups, get rid of that. Move from a high cost solid state drive to sort of a more traditional HD or whatever the opposite of solid state drive is that costs less. Reduce your compute and reduce your relational databases and get rid of all your staging environments. Makes perfect sense. I would like to actually add to that. One of the things that you could do if you are a founder or a startup entrepreneur that likes to get your hands dirty with code is you could just write more efficient code as well. There are a lot of times we take certain things like caching and system performance for granted, and we end up writing code that would work fine on a 16-core, 32 GB machine, but the same thing would need to be optimized quite a bit to run on a machine that only has 4 gigs of RAM, for example.
100%. But I'm speaking under the assumption right now that I don't want to have more developing power on it. So that's kind of the trade-off I think that an entrepreneur has to think of. If you have to now spend $1,000 just to rewrite code, and the lockdown is only for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, then what's kind of the cost-benefit analysis? If you can obviously do it yourself, then it's a different trade-off. But if you have to employ someone or spend more money to actually do it, you have to be careful.
I think I'm going to go back to something we spoke about a while ago. You said, I think in a newsletter to your stakeholders, you mentioned something about using this time to think strategically about your business, and rewriting your code base would be a strategic move to make, because when you actually scale up again, if you're using less resources, then when you go back to full capacity, you don't need to go up by 80%. You just need to go up by 60% in terms of the server resources, and that could actually be a long-term saving. But you're absolutely right; it's a cost benefit you have to look at. What are the other fixed costs? Let's not go into teams and salaries, because we've covered that already, and it's a last resort. I know most businesses would not want to impact the livelihoods of their people. But what are the other things we can get rid of? Magazine subscriptions. Being a publisher myself, I shouldn't actually be saying that, but let's talk about the elephant in the room.
No, I think for me, team is a big one. I mean, for most businesses, I would assume that rent and team are big components of their fixed costs. And I mean, team, I personally, and that's the decision we've taken, is to really just cut the team as a last resort. What we've done in the first 3 weeks is we have not, we've asked people to take leave if they want to and if they can. But otherwise, we've just offered them to work fully remotely if they could. If they were actually in factories, then we basically just said, hey, you work 70% short time, and we pay you even though you don't work. After the extension of the lockdown, we basically put everyone on short time. And if the lockdown now and the impact on the business continues, then we are thinking now about increasing short time. And if it really continues further, then we have to look at other measures as temporary layoffs or retrenchments. Having said that, we really are trying our best with the other measures that we're going to talk about to avoid this. But I think as a business owner, you basically have these levels: short time, temporary layoffs, and retrenchments are the only ways you can really do it. And depending on your percentage of your salary bill to your revenue, you will have to make more or less drastic measures, in my opinion.
Sure. What about negotiating salary cuts? So instead of getting rid of going through retrenchment, negotiating that people take a temporary cut, and that temporary cut could be 30, 20%.
Yeah. So, I mean, what we've basically communicated throughout is that we're rather taking it from everyone in the team thus far to avoid retrenchments. And this is why we send out letters as an alternative, measures as an alternative to retrenchments, basically. And we said to them, or we said to all Printulians basically to say, listen, we are really trying our best. We have done X, Y, Z. And now the team, after 3 weeks of lockdown, needs to contribute as well. And this is a philosophical question. And we had this discussion. Are we throwing out the people that have been the shortest in the company? Or are we taking from everyone? And we've taken the approach to take from everyone. This is a philosophical question. There's no right or wrong, I guess. Going forward, we would probably now not take from everyone, because you can only take from everyone up to a certain amount, I guess. And then you have to be very clear on a couple of positions that are made redundant, for example, that you just have to cut.
Alex, thank you so much. I believe that's all we have time for today. We're going to be back again next week. What can our viewers expect to see when you and I have another discussion, and who can we expect to speak to?
So I think next week, Sid, we wanted to speak about variable costs. And I think that's going to be very interesting, because we're going to share some templates and some best practices on how you can negotiate with your suppliers, what kind of trade-offs you have to make, who to pick, or how to pick your fights, and how to pick your discussions, what to prioritize in order for you to have the biggest impact on your liquidity. Yeah, because liquidity is what you have to focus on right now. Everything else does not matter in these times. Once you have secured your liquidity, then we can talk about the rest.
Fantastic. Alex, thank you so much for your time. Look forward to speaking to you next week.